perhaps in this case, what Nintendo? I'm Mr. MegaManFan. The last time Genesis Does covered a game that was on Super Nintendo, it was by accident. That was Wolfchild. This time, I'm doing it on purpose, so I feel good about it because I feel that there should be an exception to the rule every once in a while, and this version of Ms. Pac-Man definitely begs to be the exception because it is exceptionally good. As you can see from the box art, it has 36 mazes, which means way more than the original arcade game or many of the other ports of Ms. Pac-Man to home consoles. This is like Ms. Pac-Man reimagined. You can still play the classic Ms. Pac-Man if you so choose, and I will do so at the beginning just to demonstrate that capability. But once you get beyond that, there's a whole lot of fun shit going on in Ms. Pac-Man for Sega Genesis that's unlike anything else you will experience. Speaking of unlike anything you'll experience, how sweet is this copy? Perfect label. The instruction manual, I don't even want to take it out of the cardboard sleeve because I don't think it's ever been touched. And just gorgeous all around. Only minor scuffing on the box, but overall a beautiful copy of this game. So wherever I got this one from, I got my money's worth in spades. That is an awesome copy of Ms. Pac-Man. Now, before I get into what's different about this version of Ms. Pac-Man, I want to go over the history of this game really quick, just in case there are any of you watching who are unfamiliar with how this game came to be. It was not actually developed by Namco. They had nothing to do with the creation of this game. It was an arcade conversion kit made by the General Computer Corporation, and their version of the game was published by Midway, aka Bally Midway, after some legal wrangling with Namco. So, how did this happen? Why did this happen? Well, arcades at the time had maxed out what Pac-Man could generate in revenue, and they were looking for ways to convert it or upgrade it to keep people playing it. So GCC stepped in to fill that void and said, hey, we can make you a new version of Pac-Man, and they originally called it Crazy Otto, but they got into a heap of trouble for converting Pac-Man, and they were forced to pair up with Midway, the North American distributor of Pac-Man, who then purchased it from GCC and tried to come up with a name for it. And they went through several iterations before Crazy Otto finally became Ms. Pac-Man. And then, once it got that name and they decided to release it to arcades, it became a wild hit, as big as Pac-Man was, because it presented a whole new style of gameplay where you could do things that you couldn't do in the original Pac-Man game, such as the following: 4 different mazes in different color schemes that alternate for each of the intermissions, and 3 of the 4 mazes have 2 sets of warp tunnels as opposed to just 1 in the original Pac-Man. Walls are solid color rather than just an outline. The behavior of the ghost monsters has been randomized, so it's not a pattern you can memorize like the original Pac-Man, and fruits randomly move around the maze instead of starting in the center. And once you collect all of the different variants of fruit, they randomly generate new fruits too, so you're not moving through a key like you are when you get to that point in Pac-Man where the fruits never change. And the intermissions have been changed to develop a storyline between Pac-Man and Ms. Pac-Man of how they came to be in a relationship. What you're seeing now is what's called the strange Ms. Pac-Man levels. These are ones that were invented wholly for the game by the publisher Tengen and the coders who worked on the game for this conversion. These have never existed before this game. I honestly don't know if they exist anywhere else other than maybe other 16-bit generation versions of Ms. Pac-Man, but they are definitely one of a kind and put things in weird places so that if you've got the shape of a Ms. Pac-Man maze from the progression that you might know playing it previously in your head at the time, that's not going to work. You're going to have to figure out new ways to get through it. But you do have a little help in the form of an option called the Pack Booster. And when you turn on the pack booster, it's like playing what I would refer to as fast Ms. Pac-Man. You may or may not know what I mean by that, so I'll explain. When Ms. Pac-Man first came out, and for quite a bit of time after that, she moved at the same speed as Pac-Man did, but much like Pac-Man arcade games got tweaked later on, so did Ms. Pac-Man. And sometimes when you were playing a Ms. Pac-Man in the wild, you'd get the normal version, and sometimes you'd get the fast version where she'd be moving at blazing speeds from the very beginning of the game. And when you turn on the pack booster, that's like playing the fast Ms. Pac-Man. But unlike the arcade game where it's either set to slow or set to fast, in this Sega Genesis port, you can turn it on or off if you select that in the options. And when the fast is turned on, she has a trail behind her, like showing that she's moving at blazing speed. And when you turn it off, the trail vanishes. So that's how you know whether you're using the pack booster or not. And it's not a limited time boost. It's not like getting a power up that's a temporary perk in a Fallout game. When you use this boost, it's all the way. When you turn it off, it's gone, but it doesn't vanish from your inventory. You can turn it back on and use it again and boost as much as you like. And sometimes you can boost too much, as I just did right there, because I thought if I was fast enough, I would get by the ghost, and instead I slammed right into him. So sometimes you actually want to turn the boost off to move a little more carefully and trepidatiously instead of slamming into things. Since I mentioned at the outset that this was a Nintendo instead of a Nintendo, let's talk about all those different versions of Ms. Pac-Man that came out. Atari 2600, 5200, and 7800 all got copies of Ms. Pac-Man. Atari 8-bit computers got it. VIC-20 and Commodore 64 both got it. Apple II and IBM PC got it. ZX Spectrum got it. The Texas Instruments TI-99-4A got it. Of course, it did not stop there. Once we got to the 90s, it was released for the Atari Lynx, the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Sega Genesis, the Sega Master System, the Super Nintendo, and the Game Boy Color. Yes, Ms. Pac-Man got around. Insert your own punchline there. Suffice it to say that Ms. Pac-Man is one of the most widely ported arcade games of all time, appearing on home consoles, computers, and handhelds. There were even portable LCD versions and playable standalone tabletop console versions, so Ms. Pac-Man made it big in just about every format that you could possibly think of, which of course led to a sequel later on called Ms. Pac-Man Maze Madness on Nintendo 64, Sega Dreamcast, might have been a few other places as well, but that game is pretty darn good too. So it's completely different from Ms. Pac-Man because you're actually using traps and platforms and collecting certain things that you need to unlock areas, and it scrolls over multiple screens. You can't just scroll up and down one playfield. You're traversing to different playfields through Ms. Pac-Man Maze Madness, but it is great. I highly recommend you play it, just like I highly recommend you play this, even though some of these mazes can be a little frustrating because they have blocked off ports where you think you can turn, but you can't because Ms. Pac-Man can't fit through the narrow openings, whether you're moving fast or slow, and then you're forced to go all the way around. If you play the strange mazes, you get into some funky ass shit. There's one where there's appearance of a maze because the dots are outlined around what appear to be walls, but then if you move outside of the lines of dots, you don't hit a wall. You go right through empty space. It's kind of a mind fuck. I can't lie. It really will screw with you because you'll be used to playing an invisible maze from something like Pac-Man Plus, or you'll just see the outlines and expect there to be walls there even though they're invisible, and then you just go right through them and flail around trying to figure out where to go or what to do. But it can be done. It just takes a little trial and effort to get used to controlling your Ms. Pac-Man in a wall-less, mazeless environment. The freedom of motion is not something you expect. You're used to being constricted to pathways and tunnels, and then all of a sudden you're not. So you might want to turn off the pack booster when you're playing that level, because slowing down actually helps quite a bit. I was moving way too fast in my playthrough when I hit the invisible maze. It did not go well. Speaking of things that did not go well, there's been a brouhaha over the intellectual rights to Ms. Pac-Man for the last couple of years. As I noted earlier, GCC sold their rights to Ms. Pac-Man to Midway, who were the publishers of Pac-Man in the United States, but they themselves were a licensee of Namco and not the authors of the game. So this became a rather sore point between Bally Midway and Namco, which eventually led to the dissolution of their relationship because they kept making Pac-Man iterations that weren't developed by Namco or authorized by Namco. They were kind of okay with it with Ms. Pac-Man. They agreed to work together on it, but they just kept pushing the envelope and pushing the envelope further until Namco could take no more. So then we had the situation where Midway went bankrupt, and then when they did, the Ms. Pac-Man license went to Namco in 2010 because basically it was a derivative of Pac-Man, so they had all of the claims to it in the bankruptcy proceedings. Like, this is not your property, you just had a right to use it for a while, and we're taking that right back from you because it's based on our property, Pac-Man. But then it gets really funky because the notorious AtGames, makers of some of the worst home conversions of video games and arcade games and home console games in plug-and-play formats, went out and approached GCC to buy a license to Ms. Pac-Man. And this was basically their way of thumbing their nose at Bandai Namco, because Namco didn't feel that AtGames was doing a good job with the properties that they had licensed from them, and didn't want them to develop any more home console plug-and-play systems. And so they said, well, guess what? We just bought the intellectual rights to Ms. Pac-Man from the original developers of Ms. Pac-Man, so screw you, we can put out Ms. Pac-Man if we want to. And Bandai Namco immediately filed a lawsuit against AtGames, declaring that they were violating Bandai Namco's control of the license. So this is all tangled up in court now, and probably will be for years to come unless some kind of settlement is reached. But it's a very odd situation where Namco owns the rights, but they didn't develop it, so they don't own the code, and maybe GCC does. It's a mess. But this game is not a mess. It's a lot of fun, and you should play it.